Hello, everybody. Thank you, Belinda. I was whining during the break that I wished we could have this session outside, but then my consolation was all of you Southern Californians get to enjoy the sun all the time, unlike me, who is often shrouded in fog. My name is Preeta Nayak, and I work with the Bridgespan Group. Some of you may be familiar with Bridgespan. For those of you who aren't, Bridgespan is a nonprofit organization founded in 2000 with really the mission of making sure that the best in management planning, strategy, and implementation tools were available to the nonprofit sector. So we really do a range of things, including direct consulting, strategy consulting work, but also quite a bit of publishing. And so hopefully, if nothing else, you've been able to read some of the things we've written. I've been there at Bridgespan for 9 years next week. Just a couple of things maybe to know about me before we dig into the topic at hand. The first is I've been working in the sector for about 20 years, the first 5 of which I spent as a middle school history teacher. And what that means is that you guys in the back, I've got my eyes on you. And if it gets rowdy, I am very willing to flick the lights on and off and stand on a table or do whatever it is that I need to do. And actually, my hope is that it will get a little rowdy and a little active in here and that we have some conversation together this afternoon for the next hour and 15 minutes. The second thing to know about me is that, so I think Brian this morning referred to himself as a geek. And I would say, I would get a little bit more specific on that for myself, which is that I am a talent geek. That is, I think talent is by far the most important thing we should be thinking about, caring about, learning about, studying in order to achieve the impact we want to achieve as a sector. And I believe that perhaps partially because I started off my career as a middle school history teacher. And I saw a lot of paths moving in different directions at that point, for sure. But also because of the work that we have done. So as I mentioned, Bridgespan does quite a bit of planning work. We'll often be hired by an organization that's really looking to make transformative change, and they want some help thinking about how to make that happen. We may work with them for a few months, but then we'll also go back a year out, 2 years out, 3 years out, and really ask, so what happened, Was this helpful? Where are things on track? Where are they off track? What's what you thought it would be or not? And I sat for a number of years on a committee at Bridgespan that looked across all the reports that came back from those surveys. And one of the things that was really striking was, to me, was that when folks said things were off track, that they were not going as they had hoped, there were really 2 primary drivers of that. One, I don't think you'll be surprised to hear, was funding. We just haven't been able to get or secure the funding that we need. The second, though, was talent. We have great plans, we have great ambitions, we have even the money to do it, but we don't have the senior talent in particular to make it happen. We're looking to scale to another state, to another region, to another city, but we can't do that if we don't have a senior person who can really make sure that we do things right in that place. And so we at Bridgespan said and the other thing we did is we, with our clients, often do an organizational diagnostic, similar to the diagnostic some of you took, but more focused holistically at various aspects of organization. And by far, the single weakest area of organizational design that we find over the 15 years has been leadership development and succession planning. Worse than decision-making, than executive team alignment, anything else. By far the weakest area. So we said, okay, so there's a problem, right? And we want to think a little bit about what the answer is. And so what we did was a piece of research that resulted in this guide, which you can download from our website if you'd like, and we'll look at excerpts of today. Nonprofit leadership development, what's your plan A for growing future leaders? And plan A refers to a very specific tool that's talked about in here. But what we did is we looked at the for-profit sector. We looked at what the best practices were there, because they've certainly been investing. I think Belinda cited the statistic earlier the dollars that get invested. But we also then talked with about 15 different organizations that we had found were doing some things, seemed to be doing some things right, and we brought those best practices together. In our conversation today, I'd like us to do, I guess, 3 things. One is, I think it's valuable to just spend some time talking about the nature of the challenge and what we're all facing, and for you all to talk with one another as well as with me, so that we can kind of be real about the situation we're in. The second is I'm going to share a select number of practices we found and tools that in our work with clients we found to be particularly powerful and relatively easy to deploy, right? So we're not talking about multi-year, multi-million-dollar initiatives. We're talking about something that you can make part of your business tomorrow, right? So that's what we want to do. And then the last thing is, I very much believe that sessions like this are wonderful as reflection, but nothing happens if it's just talk in here. And so what I'd really love to do is have everyone really walk away from this with at least 1 or 2 things you feel like you could share or talk about or do differently with the rest of your senior team, maybe with your whole organization when you go back. So that's what we're going to spend our time on today. To start us off, I want everyone to do a little reflecting. So what I'd like you to do is take a minute to ask yourself, in your own career, I mean, we're all leaders here, right? In your own career, what experience has been most powerful in terms of your own growth? So just take, that 30 seconds to reflect, then turn to a neighbor and gab. Okay. Should I stand on the table? All right, I want to hear some good stories. All eyes to the front. So I realize I'm cutting off conversation and energy, but we're going to keep going with this. I would love to hear just a couple of good, pithy, juicy, pithy and juicy together would be great. Examples of the powerful development experience for you. Or, if it's too juicy, volunteer your neighbor.
Good afternoon. My name is Fidel. I work with YPI, Youth Policy Institute. And as you see the picture up there, I think most of us, if not all of us, can relate. And so the experience that we've experienced, specifically me, is that risk that woman is taking. The risk to decide to take the jump to a new profession, possibly, or a position of much more responsibility and accountability.
Was there a particular cliff you scaled that?
A few. So in my case, and Lisa's pushing me, my new partner over here, from the university to a teacher. I wanted to be superintendent, so I decided to try middle school principal, and then again, principal at the high school level, and now responsible to have the opportunity to impact 7,000 students on a daily basis. It's a wonderful risk, but very rewarding nonetheless.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, and I'm seeing a hand here, yeah?
Hi, my name is Ted Knoll, and I had worked downtown in Skid Row for several years, and my hometown asked me to open up a homeless shelter in Whittier, and they thought I was an expert because I was out of town.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah. And so the experience was asking me to be the executive, after we got it through the NIMBY issue, is to be the executive director. And I said yes. And what I realized is I did not want to do everything I had experienced in the past. And so for me, it was having that clean sheet, people thinking I'm the expert, having that clean sheet, and then having to network through all of my life experiences to pull together a new philosophy and a new way of looking at something that was out of the box. So that unknown, and being in that unknown was extremely productive.
Excellent. So I guess anything that you'd say is a little different from what we've heard so far? Yeah.
So this might be a little different, and then we can have your different. In 2003, I was selected as a violence prevention fellow for the California Wellness Foundation. And with that fellowship came a 2-year sort of mentorship. So I had I had zero nonprofit management skills. And for 2 years, the Center for Nonprofit Management actually mentored me through developing nonprofit skills. So being here today at this conference and looking at that question, it sort of goes full circle because I went from the only staff in 2003 to like 15 staff now in a healthy organization. And had it not been for the Center for Nonprofit Management teaching me how to set up bookkeeping, understanding some of the rules of the game and all of that, I don't think I'd be here like this today, not as healthy as the organization is. So first of all, I just need to say thank you to the Center for Nonprofit Management and hats off and all that. So thank you.
Okay, one more.
My name is Daryl with Family Assistance Program, and I used to own a business, and I did a company party where we went to Joshua Tree and we were climbing like that. But the thing that stood out to me is one of my employees' wife came over and thanked me for giving her husband a job because he'd been unemployed for a while and they were struggling, and that if he were to lose his job again, she said, I just don't know what we'll do. And that really sank into my head that my company wasn't as much about my own ego and me getting rich, which is what I thought it was, but it also was people's lives, and there were families that were going to be destroyed if I screwed up. And that's when the burden of leadership kind of lumped onto my back, and I've been carrying that since. That was in 1998. I still very clearly remember her talking to me in that conversation we had.
Well, it's important to understand the impact you're having. I wanted to start in this way because I think it's important to recognize that it's not as though there are not wonderful leadership development experiences out there in the sector. It's not as though there are no Epstones who are mentors to us, or CNMs that will give us the training that we need, or towns that will, give us responsibility that perhaps we shouldn't have, right? There are all of those types of opportunities. What we found, though, is that in talking, in particular with CEOs and executive directors, they said, yeah, I have a handful of things I do because somebody did it for me, but I don't actually know, like, in any systematic way, what it looks like to do this well. And so we're all operating in a little bit of like an ad hoc, you might strike a relationship with someone so you become their mentor, but there's no one, for example, looking out to make sure everybody has somebody doing that. You may, because it's an emergency, throw a stretch opportunity to someone, but there's no one actually thinking in advance, when X stretch opportunity comes up, we better give it to Y person, right? So those are the kinds of systematic things that folks said are lacking, and that they wanted some sense of when people are systematic, what does it look like? And so that's what we did in the guide, was essentially pull together for those organizations, and these are organizations of various sizes, so this is not something that only the large, national organization can do. What are the practices or habits that are systematic and that really help to build leaders over time? And when I say leaders, I mean both executive directors and senior leaders, folks at all levels, because you don't get the executive directors without having done the other work. And the five sort of main areas were, first, that in those organizations where leadership development is a real habit, a real part of the culture, senior leaders are engaged. Not a surprise, right? And by engaged, I don't mean that once a year somebody stands up at the picnic and says talent is our most valuable asset, right? What that means is that same person has taken the time to get to know the staff that might be sitting in their seat someday and what they need to get there. The board is playing a role, a place of great weakness, I think, in our sector in terms of leadership development. We'll talk a little bit more, and you'll see throughout this conversation that in each of the areas, frankly, the senior leaders' roles are pivotal. It just doesn't happen otherwise. The second thing relates to a theme we have seen throughout the day, and that's understanding future needs. We'll dig in quite a bit here. And it's really all about when I say, for example, succession planning to folks, most of the time what comes to mind for people is this sort of like emergency rush. The ED is going to retire, maybe, we have all sorts of time. We have 6 months, or whatever it is. And that is actually not what we're talking about here. There are some very important and very good guides and processes related to that kind of quick succession. What we're talking about here is actually thinking 3 to 5 years out, which I tend to think of as future, 3 to 5 years out, and really understanding what it is you will need so that, as Brian said this morning, I think you can build what you need to get there. The third thing is actually developing leaders, and we'll talk a little bit about the actual science and research between around the kinds of anecdotes we just heard, because everything we heard is actually backed up by the evidence of what actually works if you want to develop leaders. Hiring leaders externally as needed. That extra phrase is there for a reason. I think in general as a sector we tend to over-rely because we haven't planned in advance and invested in our people on external hires, but sometimes it makes sense. And the last, monitoring and improving practices. So just actually paying attention when you do a training, instead of automatically doing it year after year, did it actually make a difference? And then only investing again if it did. So these were the areas. The guide goes into a lot of depth. For those of you, and thank you for, I think about half of you filled out the diagnostic that you got a link to, and after this session, if you decide to, you certainly can. It's free. It takes about, 10, 15 minutes to do. You'll notice that these same categories showed up in the diagnostic. Essentially what we did in that was say, do you agree or disagree that your organization does these things? And there were about 30 questions total. Let me share with you the group's kind of collective data. There was a question that asked, I think after all the other questions, overall, do you feel like your organization's successful and effective in developing leaders? 65% of you either somewhat or strongly disagreed with that statement. That's actually surprisingly exactly the number we've gotten across I think we've got about 2,000 organizations who have taken this survey now. I don't know if that's probably bad news actually. That in general, we are this unhappy with our development. In fact, it's interesting here, one lone person strongly agreed that their organization was doing well. The rest of you somewhat agreed, 34%, and then 65% believe you're ineffective. So what's going on? What might be driving that? Let me share a little bit of the data. All of the data is in, I believe the material is going to be available online, and all of it is in the backup of this. I'm just going to share some highlights here. On that first section of engaging senior leaders, I'll just point out a few things. One is that you do feel like about 70% of you feel like your CEO's engaged and your current leaders are engaged in development. You're much less positive about your board, perhaps in part because you're not even clear on what your board should be doing, which is fair. And there's very little accountability. So nobody's held accountable. They're not necessarily recognized for those efforts. And there's very little investment of resources. So as we said before, this all sends a message, right? The second area was understanding future needs. Here, actually, you guys were weak and weaker even than what I've seen on the average. And I don't know if maybe part of that is you've been thinking about these kind of future topics more and recognize the challenge, but have not yet had a chance to act. You'll see that, a third or so of you have a sense of what leadership skills you even need now. Fewer, what capacity you might need in the future. There are about 40% of you evaluating on performance and potential, but again, not many have identified successors or have plans in place to address succession gaps. And it's that last one, I think, that is the place where, action in particular is possible. And we will spend a lot of time in this next section of our time together on these areas in particular. And the last area of developing future needs, I just wanted to point something out. Part of the challenge seems to be just processes. So I noticed that there's like a Taproot guide, I think, in your bags that has some different processes in it on like performance processes and performance plans. And I thought that was great because at some level, what can be a challenge is you may just not have the basic performance management process in place, like a regular review form, a regular review cycle, and that's important as a first step. But the other thing, though, is that for those individuals who have potential, who you really do want to invest in for the future, having some sort of plan that you've co-created with them, which right now it looks like, again, less than a third. Now, what's nice is there do seem to be some quality on the job development. 60% of you, when I think of stretch opportunities, and then that makes sense, right? I mean, if nothing else in the sector, we have plenty of challenges that people can throw themselves at, right? But again, I think we need to think about systematic. All right. The other two areas, hire leaders externally, you can look at the details in the slide presentation, is stronger in general, and this is what we've seen across the results. People feel better about their ability to hire leaders externally, less good about internally. Monitoring and improving practices is by far the weakest, not just for this group, but for everyone. And that's because if you don't have the practice in place, you can't monitor it, right? I mean, it makes sense that that would be where the lowest scores are. Okay, so I just brought all the energy down in this room. I did it because first of all, I put some charts up there, and then I talked at you for a long time. So we're gonna change that up a little bit, and we're gonna now that we've seen ourselves in the mirror a little bit, we're gonna think about how to spruce ourselves up. All right, we're going to think about understanding future needs and developing future leaders. I loved this morning's session, the question of what are you optimizing for, and in particular, what is the vision that you need to build toward? And so, to that end, what I would like for you to do at your tables is take the next 10 minutes or so to discuss this question for your own organization. And that is, how will the leadership capabilities required for your mission success differ in the future? And maybe think of a 3-year or 5-year point. So in order for your strategy to be successful, how will your leadership capabilities need to be different? And if it helps a little to anchor, I think there are 3 ways in general I've seen this play out. One is scope, like the scope of what you're doing may just be changing, and that may have implications for capabilities. The second is scale, right? We just shrinking, growing, whatever it is, new community. And the last is the succession point. You probably know there are some critical positions in your organization that you are at risk of having a transition over the next 3 to 5 years. So that could also be a trigger. All right, so discuss amongst yourselves. I have a thing here. Okay. And you can make up for it later. But 10 minutes, so they have. So won't be. This so wonderful. Yeah. Yeah. They, I think that last year at our conference, one of the things they said is we didn't have enough time to pass it. Yeah, you expanded. He pulled off the distance thing really well. I thought it did. Yeah. Or like talked about it. I did. You know, our sixth president. He's talking. Yeah. No, I can't. Yeah, I cannot, but I wouldn't mind being a fly on the. I wasn't a fly on his shoulder. Yeah. For a day or two. It was interesting because he said, you know, he kind of figures out what's the question. So I thought the answer. You know, and they'll have breaks. They'll each other. They'll have. Yeah. How much time do you? Well, I think. Oh no. Oh. Okay. Yeah, I think I would agree. I think that's okay. Yeah. You want to get as much. Two more minutes. Just so you know. Okay. Okay, I'm going to cut off. Wonderful conversation once again. and ask, as all of you were doing your, what was the word we heard this morning, future casting? As you were doing your future casting, thinking about the capabilities, the leadership capabilities that you would need in order to succeed in the future. Any themes that were coming out as multiple at the tables? Yes. Minimizing burnout. Tell me a little bit more. You got a mic now.
Well, typically in a nonprofit, you wear multiple hats. You have multiple duties, even though you have one title. And so how can you help the staff, whether it be future leaders or current, to not burn out and want to continue?
Excellent. And if that's great. And I don't know if anyone at this table or anyone in the room read, there's a piece that's, I think, currently on the New York Times most emailed list about, I think the title is, Why You Hate Work. Which I forwarded to myself at work, and then it was like at the top of my email all day. And I was like, I really got to like move that from there. It is an excellent piece by a group, by the Energy Group, that's also done some sort of in-depth research on just this question. An article that they wrote in Harvard Business Review is called "Manage Your Energy, Not Your Time," and it makes a lot of the same points. But I think it's the reason I mention it is I think we actually at Bridgespan in San Francisco may, as a senior team, just read the article together and actually talk about, what would be the one or two things we might do systematically to help our current and future leaders manage their energy, not their time. So I think that is an important theme. Any other themes coming out about future capabilities in the room? Yes?
I've engaged the Nonprofit Center to help with some consultants that will be working with us at the Jeffrey Foundation. We serve special needs children, but we still haven't found any other agency that does exactly what we do. So even though I may be bowing out in a while, we're still going to try to maintain our community work, and I've been very happy with the work that's being done. And I think this conference is just a great help to all of us, because we don't want to duplicate services. We don't want to be around if we don't need to be around, asking for money from very worthy organizations. And I think that this type of a conference really helps us all. And our table was really deep into a conversation about this. Thank you for putting this to us.
Sure. And I think that I don't know if everyone caught the beginning of that, but just talking about how some agencies have multiple leaders that are likely to retire within a certain time frame. I mean, I have worked with clients who, have a senior team that is entirely comprised of people in their early 60s who are all considering next steps, right? And that is, well, first of all, if you're on the board of that organization, you should be like waking up, right? But, I think that's not, I mean, I think I've seen this sort of crisis point happen in two ways. One, in organizations like that might be very established and have, some folks who are retiring, and then others that are just kind of more really kind of hot entrepreneurial small nonprofits that are rapidly growing and just have like spots to fill, right? And may have, I see someone going like this, may actually have a lot of churn, young people coming in and out, for example, that they need to think about. So there are different ways. The other theme that I think we'd be remiss in not mentioning is the one that we heard earlier today on collaboration. So we did a little bit of extra research to try and understand, if you look across the sector at the types of capabilities that are required now or sort of soon compared to before, what are some of the differences? And two big things popped. One was things around measurement and evaluation, which I think has become more and more important. And the second was around collaboration in many, many forms, meaning that sometimes it's interagency, sometimes it's about public-private sector. There are a lot of different ways that that plays out, but collaboration was the other theme. Now, if, again, this is a wonderful thing to do as an exercise here. What would be the natural time, though, to have this conversation within your organization? Tomorrow. So your strategic planning, yeah. I think that it may have been better 15 years ago, it may have been better yesterday, it may be good tomorrow, but if nothing else, if you are going through some sort of planning process, that is really a natural time to stop and ask yourself, what is the talent, in particular perhaps the senior talent, we will need to actually make this happen, right? I mean, that's a lesson we ourselves at Bridgespan have learned. That's really important to ask. And I was talking with Belinda during the last kind of breakout, and she was saying how so often in her experience this becomes a very personalized conversation. So it becomes like, you know, X person's leaving, can they be replaced with Y person? And like, there's no discussion of actual capabilities needed in the role. You just sort of assume you're going to kind of, the world is going to stay the same. And the other nice thing about starting from the planning conversation is your mind at that point should be on what is the impact we're trying to achieve? What is it going to take us to get there? And so you're not as necessarily grounded in the individuals, recognizing, of course, we all have to be practical and work with what we got to work with, right? Okay, let me take us now to the next topic. If, let's say, you know where you think you're headed, that vision that you have that you're building towards, the next question will be, where are you now, right? What do you have now? What do you have to work with? And so the tool that we found that can be quite useful in framing this conversation is called a performance potential matrix. So typically, discussions of people, first off, if they happen, discussions of people tend to focus on performance, right? How good they are today at their job. Poor performer, good performer, strong performer. Performance potential matrix goes a little bit further. So there's demonstrated performance as one of the axes, so is the x-axis. But the y-axis is demonstrated potential. So you're adding an extra layer to your consideration. And so what you find is you may have an individual who is both rocking their current job and has shown to you that they may be very well capable of taking on work a layer or two above where they currently sit, right? That's what we got in the top right. We just labeled superstar. That's the official term, superstar. There is this person. Nobody's ever encountered this person, I'm assuming. Where I think probably many of us spend often too much of our time. Someone who is underperforming in their current role and you don't actually believe has future potential. That's in the other corner. The nugget is low performance but very high potential. How in the world does this happen? What's going on? How does someone land in the nugget box? You got to shout. Yeah. It could be that, though. That implies that they do have the potential in them. Maybe you can't see it, though, so it's not demonstrated. I think the place where you'll most often see this is somebody maybe in the wrong role. You know, they're just not in the right job for them to really be a star, or they're really new and they just haven't had a chance to build the skills yet. And the last, but certainly not least, the reliable professional. I think most of our organizations succeed or fail based on these people. These are the people who are just doing their job really, really well and very happy to do it. May not necessarily be seeking the next position or be looking for that. Okay. So here's a question about, I think about 40% of you said that you somewhat agreed with the statement that you evaluate your staff both on performance and potential. I'd love to hear how people define potential. Can anyone who maybe who has an organization that's thought about this, or if you just as an individual have thought about this, how do you define potential, leadership potential? Do you do that? Is this something your organization thinks about systematically, or you're just giving a personal opinion?
I think that when we do consider the issue, that those factors are definitely examined.
Okay, good, great. Problem solving, flexibility. Okay, so like big.
Part of a subcommittee, sorry, being part of a subcommittee and being really active and just taking on initiative as you know, a way of looking at that person as a potential leader.
Yeah. So maybe like the big fish in the small pond before the bigger leadership pond, right?
Exactly.
Or whatever. Yeah, great.
And in kind of piggybacking on those, when he was talking about the problems, a lot of times you can see potential in individuals. The ones that come to you wanting you to fix the problem, that have issues, or the ones that come to you and let you know how they're going to fix the problem as long as you're okay with their decision. So they've already kind of thought this out ahead of time. And then those that are looking to do other things instead of waiting for you to tell them this needs to be done and that needs to be done, they have already seen that there are other things that need to be done, which as a leader, you're never done.
Yep.
There's always work. So when you see someone who who points out to you, hey, we did not do this or this, and that's coming up, do you want me to handle it or something? You know this person has potential to start leading.
Yep. No, that's great. That's great. That proactivity. Yeah, one last addition on the definition.
I think lots of times the person with potential is the one who can see the potential in the organization. So they are, a little more visionary than most, and so they see the bigger picture, and they understand the story, and they can communicate it well to others.
Great. So I think this is actually an important and not necessarily easy question to answer as an organization. But if you are going to use this kind of tool, it's essential that you answer it, right? Because what happens if you don't define potential? What happens if you don't define it? What? You may not find it, or you may end up with conversations like this, where I'm like, there's this kind of young Asian woman. She seems really like a go-getter. I think she has a lot of potential, right? You end up with a lot of people who may look exactly like you, right? You may end up replicating what you have instead of what you need, right? You may not actually come to a joint solution of what it is. So it's really important for a lot of reasons, both related to biases and diversity and those sorts of things, but also related to actually being strategic to define it. There are different exercises you can do as a senior team or as an organization to think about this. There is an organization called the Corporate Leadership Council that aggregates best practices from like literally thousands of organizations, including primarily for-profits. And they have looked at this definition of potential, and what they've seen is that in general, the best definitions tend to have these three components. That leadership potential is made up of aspiration. So you actually, someone has the desire to move into that greater responsibility, that different responsibility. Some leadership abilities and traits, so we're hearing some of that, this sort of flexibility, the proactivity, those sorts of things, some of which maybe, I think it is incumbent upon us as current leaders to actually be explicit that we want those things. And the last thing is engagement, right? I think we all know we have some employees who are lifers, right? They're really in it. And we have some who are there and probably only there for a little bit, you know? And so sort of all of those things. Now, you can't assess these things sitting in, how was it talked about earlier, sitting in your cube or sitting in your office. You have to actually have a conversation, right? Someone has to talk to me to understand what my aspirations are, and they have to do it more than once. Because my aspiration today in my life at the point I'm in may not be the same as my aspiration 5 years from now or 5 months from now, depending on how things are going. So there are a couple of different things, but these are some of the best practices. Now here's what I'd like you to do. You've all got on your table a sheet. Oh, sorry, let me mention one other thing. Once you have identified someone with high potential, the question is, how do you develop it? And I mentioned that there's research and science behind what actually works. And the ratio, the Center for Creative Leadership did some research decades ago that's been replicated that shows that if you actually want to develop leaders, 70% of that development is likely to happen on the job, right? And if you think back to the examples we heard at the beginning of this conversation, there was a lot of like what was happening in your work. 20% of it is coaching and mentoring, right? Because you will not be able to, succeed in that stretch opportunity as well if someone is not providing you some guidance. And only 10% of it is formal training. And I think this is really, really important for us to hear, because so often when I ask someone, what kind of development are you doing in your organization? They say, well, we don't have any money, right? And I get that. But on the job and coaching and mentoring doesn't necessarily take money, right? Even training, if you build on your internal expertise, doesn't necessarily take money. So I will encourage us, push us to move away from that excuse and actually think about how we have developed and how the science tell us development happens, and so that we can do a better job. Now here's what I'd like you to do in the last 10 minutes that we have. 8 minutes, and then I'm going to give us 2 minutes for wrap up. Just pair up with someone at your table and try to place one of your direct reports on the matrix. Try to place one of your direct reports on the matrix, on the performance potential matrix, and then actually ask yourself, what would be the 70-20-10 development experience that you would want, development experiences you would want to provide for them if they were actually to be able to achieve their potential, okay? So just pair up with one person and try to do that for the next 5 minutes. If I were to say to you, I want you to, I think what you should all do as your next step coming out of this conference is, as your full senior team, each of you should map your direct reports onto this matrix, individually do it, and then you should come together and discuss your evaluations. What would be useful about that, about doing that? What would feel like, okay, I can see the value? Of having everyone at the senior level do this kind of exercise, mapping all of their direct reports, then coming together and talking about it.
You would know who you need to mentor, who you need to work hard, you could push, who has potential, and you may want to go bye-bye.
Yeah, so you would, again, and you may have known those things as an individual, but you will collectively, as a group, come to consensus on that. Yeah, and I hear some nodding. Yeah.
Sorry, we're a two-person organization. So, are there other people?
So what I suggest you do is you can each map your family members.
Right? But I'm I'm guessing
and then
that
come
there
together.
are other, like, there must be other nonprofits
So,
who are from really small organizations.
Yeah, and so in those cases, I think it's much more. You don't need a mapping tool. You can. I think it's much more. Part of it is just a discussion about each of you sort of honestly reflecting on development. And I'm happy to talk more about other things you can do in such a small organization. It's also something you might use as a board.
Under 5 employees, raise your hand.
Yeah. So if you have 5 or under employees, I think that obviously the mapping, you don't need the mapping tool, but I do think that the reflection on who actually still has potential for growth is important for 2 reasons. One, that growth may happen within your own organization. Great. If so, you'd be important to tell that person you want to invest in them. 2, it may be that growth needs to happen elsewhere, and you need to sort of be honest about that. I think sometimes what we do is we sort of like shy away from thinking that someone's going to leave us, and that's just a little silly, right? Because it's going to happen. And so the extent to which you can sort of be prepared for and think about that process. But this idea of communicating is the other thing that comes out of this conversation. I have talked to so many incredibly talented young leaders who have no idea how valued they are in organizations because no one has ever said to them, oh yeah, I totally can see you having my job in whatever number of years, or moving up and doing this. And because we just assume, well, they're so great, they must know they're great, right? There are also the other examples of the people who seem to know they're great a lot. But that's a different conversation we could have. Now, what is the bad part of this kind of exercise? If you went on, what are the risks of everyone going out, doing this kind of mapping, and then sitting together and having a conversation about where everyone sits? The bottom performers? For them, there's a risk. Right. Yeah, okay, that's true.
Well, there's also a risk of labeling people
yeah.
and boxing them and not letting them move beyond that. So I think that's the risk of it.
No, I think there is that. I think there's the people doing this without any kind of criteria, and then ending up in a place where you're just not really being very fair or systematic. And then I think there's labeling people and boxing them in, and then never really revisiting the conversation, never really talking about evolution over time. I mean, what you'd really like to see is people moving up and to the right over time, right? And that can happen. So what you must do is link this to the what are we now going to do in terms of people's development conversation. I've been getting the out of time flag, so I will just say quickly a couple of things. On your table, on the other side of this sheet, this is some data on managers that you can find about basically how we have a lot of people who want to be better at managing people. We just need to get them there. There's just some next steps. Everything I talked about today is there, plus a lot more in depth. There are videos on how to use these different tools, exercises. You can take the diagnostic survey, even take it as a team. Just email me and I'll give you the link. And in general, please be in touch. If you're the smaller organization that didn't hear the answers you want or need, or if you're larger and you want to test some of these things out, we are very much there to help you. Thank you.
Thank you, Preeta.